Thank you very much. First, I should start off by apologizing for not speaking Japanese. And who knows, I may be able to learn some during my years in Tokyo, and I would like to. The reason I wanted to meet here today with members of the Japanese language press is that the UN University is not very well known in Japan. And the Japanese citizens, of course, read Japanese language newspapers, not English language newspapers. So I'm hopeful that through you, I can reach members of the Japanese public with my colleagues and explain a little bit about the UN University and why our presence in Tokyo, beyond being good for the UN University, may also be helpful to Japan. Just a couple of words about our history. The United Nations was beginning to feel in the 1960s and early 1970s that it needed more capacity to generate knowledge internally. At the same time as Japan was beginning to be tremendously successful economically with its post-war recovery. And so these two trends, which were quite separate, came together when at the United Nations there was a desire to create a think tank for the UN system. And in Japan, there was a growing desire to host international activity in Tokyo and elsewhere in Japan. The result was that the United Nations University, which was agreed in 1972, started with its headquarters in Japan in 1975. And some years later, the Japanese authorities commissioned your great architect, Kenzo Tange, to build the very beautiful building in Shibuya that we have occupied for the last 22 or 23 years. So we are very fortunate in our building in Tokyo and to be in a part of the city that is so dynamic and actually also so young, which suits our mission. In Japan, most people see our building, they know we are active in Japan, but they might be surprised to know that we are really a grouping of 15 research institutes in different countries of the world, with our headquarters in Japan. At any given time, we, as a group of research institutions, employ anywhere between 150 and 200 researchers, with others supporting the work of our research teams. In Japan, divided between the headquarters and a think tank in Tokyo on sustainable development and peace, and another think tank in Yokohama, primarily focused also on aspects of sustainable development. You may be interested in how we are governed, how we are supervised. I am appointed by the UN Secretary General, who consults the Director General of UNESCO before appointing me. And my appointment was the result of a competitive process. I saw an advertisement in the magazine The Economist for the job, and I simply applied. And then there was a long process of interviews, and finally I was appointed last October. The Secretary General also appoints our governing council, 24 individuals from all over the world who are our governing body. One of them is a very distinguished Japanese individual, an expert in the field of arms control and disarmament, Nobuyasu Abe, who used to be an Undersecretary General of the UN in the field of disarmament. And I should add that the fact that the position I occupy is resident in Japan was a great attraction for me, as I had never lived in Japan before. And just 3 more points from me before we turn over to you for your questions. The first is that 4 years ago, it was decided that the UN University could and should experiment with teaching some graduate programs. And actually, we started in Tokyo with a master's program, Masters of Science, but mainly focused on sustainable development a few years ago under the supervision of Dr. Takeuchi. At the council meeting, which is coming later this week and early next week, we will be discussing what the best model for teaching is at UNU. One model is to do it all ourselves and keep it autonomous. The other model would be for us to work very closely with a leading university of whatever country the program is organized in. And so we will be consulting the council on these 2 possible models. And uppermost in my mind, and I'm sure that of my colleagues, will be what would be best for our students. And I think also that's what council members will be interested in. Secondly, I wanted to mention that the UN University has been very important for developing countries and continents. And many of our students come from the developing world. So UNU is very much involved in the project of advancing the development of poorer countries. Thirdly, I would want to say that Japan has been a very generous host of the UN University here. It helped, with a very generous contribution, launch our endowment fund, which has grown significantly since 1975, and since then other countries have contributed to it. And secondly, it has supported quite a lot of our research work and various research projects. It isn't the principal funder of our research projects, contrary to what you might think. We have many contributors to this work. The European Union, for example, is a leading contributor. Sweden's development program is also a leading contributor, and there are many others. So Japan has a lot of company in supporting our work. Finally, I wanted to mention that in any think tank, in any academic institution, there is a tension between academic freedom and autonomy of researchers and the core mission of the institution. Our researchers enjoy absolute freedom of opinion and expression. So that issue isn't controversial. What has been controversial recently is a sense in the United Nations that UNU may not have been useful enough to the United Nations itself. So when I was selected and appointed, I was given a strong message by the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, but also by the Director General of UNESCO, that we had to make an effort to connect the work of UNU more closely with the needs in terms of research and policy development of the United Nations. And so with my colleagues, we will be working very hard on that in the next 5 years. We only work on research that can be useful to policy. If it cannot be useful to the development of policy nationally and internationally for member states of the UN, we shouldn't be doing it. And that is the difference between a think tank and an academic university which can pursue knowledge for its own sake. A think tank is generally focused on how the research can be useful to societies, and in our case, international society. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm sure exercised your patience. And now my colleagues and I will be interested in hearing your questions and trying to respond to them.